Hello, everyone. So, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Douglas Johnson. I am a certified yoga teacher. I teach meditation, spirituality. I am a certified Kilobi inquiries facilitator. And so, if you're interested in all things deep, esoteric spirituality, the journey inward, then you are in the right place. Today, I'd like to speak a little bit about emotional honesty. This is, I think, the second video where this is sort of the topic of conversation, and I feel like it's a good time to speak again about that. But before I do want to mention and thank all of my patrons on Patreon. They are the ones who create a financial bed or support for me to create this content and share freely. So if you are a regular viewer and you'd like to become a part of that community, it's not a large community, so it's a small community of people who really support, believe in what I do and support me. And so if you're someone who gets value from my content, please consider joining that community. You can find links below, and you can start supporting with as little as $1 a month. It does add up. But again, thank you to all of you who are already doing that. And also thanks to those on YouTube who like, subscribe, comment. That helps to spread the word. So if, again, you find value and you want to help the message reach more people, then doing those things helps greatly. Okay, so I've spoken before about emotional honesty. Emotional honesty is recognizing that we as human beings, we value how we feel perhaps more than anything else. And a great example of this is if I have $1 billion and yet if I feel lonely, I feel misunderstood, I feel undervalued, I don't feel loved, then the $1 billion, the $1 million in the bank likely will not bring a sense of happiness and fulfillment. It doesn't really matter how large the number is. You know, one could argue that maybe you could try and buy those things. Still doesn't matter. If I, pay someone to say that they love me, but I don't feel loved, that's what really matters, is that I feel loved. Okay. Likewise, if I'm homeless, I live on the street, but I have a very high sense of self-worth, self-respect. Again, it may not make sense, and that's part of my point in today's talk, is that how we feel doesn't have to make sense. So again, if I live off the land or live on the street or I am homeless, but in my own heart and mind, I see that as a choice, and it could be a choice. Again, you may assume someone who lives on the street or lives a lifestyle that isn't full of financial abundance, that no one would ever choose that, but that would be a mistake, because throughout history we find people have chosen monastic lives, or the life of a hermit, or the life of a renunciate. They've chosen that life. Sometimes they've even given up wealth, riches, influence, fame to pursue a monastic life, the life of a renunciate, the life of a hermit. So again, if we grow up in a certain culture that values material wealth above all else, values consumerism and consuming goods and services as the end all and be all, and values capital, right? We live, if you're watching this video, good chance you live in a culture that's dominated by this idea of capitalism, right? So capital sort of rules all. How much value is what you're doing produce? Then that shows your value to society, right? If you aren't producing something that has a high ticket value, a good or a service, then you are not that valuable. So we can forget growing up in this kind of culture that there are other ways that humans can value things. And I would argue that at the end of the day, most human beings value above all else really how they feel. Now, sometimes people try and make a distinction between men and women, and they say that women are more emotional and men are more logical. You can make that argument, and there's some truth to it. But at the end of the day, if a man feels depressed, if he feels lonely, if he feels unloved, you're probably not going to be able to rationally talk to him rationally and make him feel differently. Okay, so yes, maybe men are swayed more by, and this is a generalization, so again, don't say I'm saying this is a rule, but in general, yes, maybe men are swayed more by logical arguments, but there is a limit to that. I've heard people say before that what we do as human beings is we often will use logic in reverse. So we will feel a certain way about something, and then we will try and reverse, try and make sense of it using logic in reverse. So we will justify the way we feel using logic. So if you know me, I am a yoga teacher, I'm a spiritual teacher, and being an expert in psychology and whether people are backwards rationalizing things, whether that's true or not, that is beyond my pay grade. But I do want to plant that seed that there may be truth to that maybe men seem more logical, but maybe they are just rationalizing their emotions and how they feel, right? Because that's just how men operate. That's how men's minds work. They tend to be more rational. So yes, they may be able to understand things from a rational perspective as far as maybe, studies or things like that. They may have an advantage there or a proclivity there. And so when it comes to their emotions, they may apply the same sort of brain logic there. What I'd like to say, though, today is I don't think it matters if you are a man or a woman. At the end of the day, we are motivated by how we feel. So again, if working hard, if producing goods and services of a high value makes me feel like I have high value and I have high worth, then that will motivate me. It doesn't matter if it's true or not, right? I can logically say, well, I'm adding value to society. But honestly, if we look at a lot of the goods and services that are produced in our culture, we can question how much value we're truly creating or adding. If I create a novelty gift that is all the rage, one season or 1 year, and lots of people buy it, and is it really producing that much value? Outside of maybe food and shelter, how much value are we really creating? And we can question, again, if I have a food product that I create that is maybe very popular, but actually long-term is causing disease and illness, then is there really any value in that? Even though people are maybe paying a high ticket value for it? If it's causing illness down the line and causing huge hospital bills, is there really value there? We can question that. So again, what motivates us as human beings is how we feel. And this is really what I specialize on. Because what I've found is getting in touch with our spiritual life will fundamentally shift and change how we feel in an important and significant way that affects every other aspect of our life positively. Ultimately, positively. Temporarily, there can be some bumps, there can be some challenges, but ultimately, the spiritual path and spiritual truth, and we could even get rid of that word spiritual. We could just say the truth about who and what we are, which is accessible to us as human beings. If we're really devoted and committed to understanding, we can let go of our temporary and our fleeting identity that we tend to identify with as a human being, and we can put that in perspective, and we can emphasize our true nature, and by doing that, change how we feel on a fundamental basis. And for me, that's why I do what I do, because that's what happened to me starting in my 20s, and since then it's been pretty much a lifelong journey. Some periods where perhaps I lacked guidance, these periods were maybe necessary, maybe unavoidable, but there was a lot of suffering there, a lot of challenges. And then other periods, like the modern period that I'm in, are really full of a lot of joy. And the suffering tends to be more like road bumps, speed bumps, things that I come across occasionally. But the day-to-day, the moment by moment, there really is a gratitude and a sense of peace and joy that pervades, that is really undescribable. So this is what I try and share with people who listen to these talks and who come to my yoga classes and come on my meditation retreats, is techniques and methods to help you feel differently than you may feel. If you already have what I'm describing, then you're good. You really don't need to listen to what I have to say. You've already found the answers for yourself. But if you find there are areas where there's lacking, then it's my hope that my experience and training may be able to be of value to you and help you. So one area where people may fail to understand emotional honesty. So emotional honesty, basically, let me just say this real quick, is saying, when you do X, I feel Y, without trying to blame the others. And I gave a talk recently about you are not to blame, but you are responsible. And that's an important concept to grasp. If you haven't watched that video, I do recommend you go back and you watch it. But if I can just be emotionally honest, it's a little bit like a math equation or a logic proof. When you say X, it makes me feel Y, or I feel Y. Again, makes me might be problematic because ultimately things aren't causal the way that we tend to think of them as human beings. There are so many things that go into cause and effect. And we as humans, because of our limited capacity to process information with our conscious mind, we tend to oversimplify things, right? So again, if we were to say, you doing X made me feel Y, in a sense, that would mean that there was a direct causation. And in a sense, it would be true for everybody. And it would be true all the time. And what we find is with emotions, a lot of times that's not the case. A lot of times we might say something, and in one context, when we are feeling good and everyone's laughing, everybody might laugh. And in another context, at another time, someone might get offended or get upset. Okay, so this is important to understand, that saying in emotional honesty, when you do this, I feel, when you do X, I feel Y. Again, it may not always be true. And we want to be careful about saying you're causing me. Okay, but we're just recognizing maybe a pattern that we've seen. So when you're on your phone, when we're together, it makes me feel like I'm unimportant, or it makes me feel like you don't value my attention, or it makes me feel like I'm boring you. Okay? Now, the importance with emotional honesty is we're not saying that the other person is doing this intentionally, or we're not even saying that they should stop or that they're doing anything wrong. And this is an important thing to understand about emotional honesty, is all we're trying to convey is, again, our inner landscape, which, depending on a person's sensitivity, they may or may not have access to. A lot of people, most people in fact, they are so concerned with their own well-being that they are oblivious to how other people feel. I have someone in my life who's very sensitive to my emotional states, yet they don't necessarily know what emotional state I'm in. They can just sort of sense if I feel poorly or bad or off in some way. And what I've learned is that not sharing, not being completely emotionally honest with this person can cause a lot of problems. Now, here's another thing that's interesting about emotional honesty is we first have to be emotionally honest with ourselves. And this can be a big, big, big step for many people. And again, if I were to maybe generalize, I might say it's a bigger thing for many men than it is for women. And again, this is a generalization for sure. So a lot of men in our culture, we were raised in a way where very often we are encouraged or told in various ways that how we feel emotionally is unimportant and even should be hidden, and should not be acknowledged or addressed, or doesn't need to be acknowledged or addressed. This has definitely been my experience in many, many ways, and I don't want to get into whether that is right or wrong, or it's definitely been my experience, and it's been the experience of others as well. So maybe it's not everyone's experience. Maybe it varies from region or culture or your parents or others around you. Sure, that's true of every human experience. But this can happen. So men sometimes can be very emotionally out of touch with their own feelings, not think that it's important for them to process their feelings or be in touch with their feelings. So if you aren't, it's very hard to be emotionally honest. It's very, very difficult. You do need to be in touch with how you're feeling. You need to value that that's important. It doesn't mean that you need to dump on anybody emotionally. It doesn't mean that, again, that anyone else is responsible for how you're feeling. But what you're trying to convey with emotional honesty is, again, perhaps a pattern that you've seen. And the great value in emotional honesty is in relating and relationships. So increasing and improving the communication that we have with someone who we feel is important to us. So when you do X, I feel Y. Again, not even you cause me to feel Y or I should feel Y. Again, letting go of justifications, right? Of course I'm going to be upset because you said this or that. Who wouldn't be upset? Right? This is justifying that we're right to feel the way we feel. You can put all of that aside with emotional honesty. You just are being very factual about what's happening and what is happening. Again, we'll use this example of the phone. When we're at dinner and you're checking your phone instead of looking me in the eye and valuing the time that we have together, I feel that you don't value me, or I feel that you're bored. That makes me feel insecure. That makes me feel whatever it might be, right? Whatever those feelings might be. Again, letting go of, because some people might try and go to manners and say, well, it's rude when you're on your phone and you're with somebody. Sure. I think a lot of people can agree with that statement. But sure, people do rude things all the time. People do inconsiderate things all the time. It's not doesn't mean we're always going to get what we want or people are always going to behave the way they should. I don't think we can expect anyone we relate to be perfect, to do everything exactly as it needs to be done. So again, emotional honesty we can use in instances where it's something important to us, right? It's worth addressing. And again, usually this would be something that's a pattern that we notice. Our partner or the person we're relating to has a tendency to look at their phone. And because of my upbringing, because of my conditioning, because of my assumptions, because of my emotional makeup, whatever the reason, that makes me feel, again, why? Undervalued, underappreciated, like I'm not being seen or listened to, like I'm not loved, whatever it might be. Again, we can have so many different reactions to that. So one thing that can happen with emotional honesty that I've seen when counseling couples, and again, I'll say this is oftentimes something that I've seen men do more. Again, I can't say that only men do this or that's always the case because my sample size is so small. But I'm just sharing, again, experience with you that men will often turn, again, to logic or reason. And so their partner might say, again, I don't feel like we spend enough time together. And then the gentleman might say, what are you talking about? We took this trip and we did this and we did that, whatever. Now here's the main point I'd like to get across today. What is important is, again, how the person feels. Now, when I'm conveying an emotional truth to you, so to speak, quote, air quotes, an emotional truth to you, you're not going to change how I feel by appealing to logic. Okay? So again, if I say, hey, I feel lonely, and then you say, oh, well, I've done this and this and this, and we spent all this time together, no one hears that and then is like, oh, you know what? You're right, I don't feel lonely anymore. That's not how it works, right? Our emotions as human beings don't have to be logical. And it's part of the richness of being a human being. And so navigating a relationship emotionally is, again, hearing the emotional content. Because some people are better or worse at emotional honesty. So some people are very good at being able to say, when you do X, I feel Y, without bringing in shame and guilt and responsibility and making the other person feel that they are to blame for how we feel. Other people, they will do that. They will frame everything as in, you did this to me. You made me feel unloved. You made me feel whatever it might be. So the good news is that we can practice what I'm talking about today, even if the person we are with is they're not very skilled with emotional honesty, meaning that they actually think that there is this sort of causal cause and effect, and that how they feel justifies you having to change how you are or do something. So again, these are two separate things, related, but still ultimately they are two separate things. So if I can hear what someone's emotional need is, again, instead of trying to address it with logic, instead of trying to argue against it, again, instead of trying to say, hey, you shouldn't feel that way, or it's wrong for you to feel that way, a lot of times a much more efficient, effective way of dealing with the problem is simply to acknowledge it. And a great way to do this is just to repeat back to the person what they're saying. Again, thinking in terms of, when I do X, you feel Y. That is just very, very good way to look at these things. When I look at my phone, you don't feel seen or heard or loved or appreciated, whatever it might be. So you can repeat this. When I do X, you feel Y. Is that correct? Person can correct you or say, yes, that's exactly it. Then the next step is very simply, what could I do to make you feel differently? What could I do to rectify the problem? Is there anything? And then you can open up a very clear dialogue, and boundaries can be set or agreements can be made. And what I found counseling people, and this is something that I do, by the way, pastoral counseling. So if you're interested, I would do work with families and individuals and couples, giving them counseling from a spiritual perspective, a spiritually rich perspective. But when you open up that dialogue, it can become very clear. And what I've found is, very often, if there is true love and respect there, which often there is, very often that's why people will be in counseling, or they'll bring me in because there is love and respect there. There just is a communication breakdown somewhere, a lack of empathy or understanding because of perhaps fear or confusion. So I very often find that once someone understands that it's not about them being evil or bad or a bad partner, it's about understanding their partner or the person they're relating to, their needs. And I find very often people are willing to meet those needs. They're willing to accommodate them. So sometimes it just means, again, let's take the example of the phone. If I hear that, if I'm in the habit of checking my phone, again, it may be something I've never even considered. I may never have even thought that me checking my phone, looking at my phone when I'm at dinner with my partner would make her feel undervalued or underappreciated or not heard, or again, whatever emotional response that might trigger. Now, again, I do want to be very clear here. We can say they shouldn't feel that, right? If they were secure, if they were confident, if whatever, they wouldn't feel that. You know, shouldn't. We human beings, we're complex. And I think that's part of the richness of being human and part of the richness of relating as a human being is overcoming these sorts of communication blocks. These areas where can we improve our relating and communication? So again, taking this example of the phone, my partner comes and says, hey, when we're at dinner and I'm talking to you and mid-sentence you pick up your phone and check your messages, that makes me feel why. Okay, I can take that and repeat that back. Okay, if I'm hearing or understanding you properly, when I check my phone when we're at dinner, that makes you feel unloved or unimportant, whatever it is. Okay? They say yes. Then it can go several ways. That could just be a nasty habit that I've picked up, being single for maybe years or even a decade or longer. I've never thought about how me checking my phone, which is a habit, right? It's not important to me, it's just a habit. I just check my phone because I do that all the time. And I've never considered how someone else might see that. And hearing this, I might actually be able to say, yeah, I can understand how you feel. I would probably feel the same if you did that. I'll try and stop. And again, what I've found counseling people is very often this is the stance that somebody takes. What the person who's being emotionally honest and vulnerable, the person who's sharing, when you do X, I feel Y, when they're sharing that, very often the solution isn't a huge ask. Sometimes, right? Very often. Maybe not always, but very often they aren't saying you need to quit your job or you need to move to Alaska or you need to stop spending time with your children or something like this. It's very often very small things. And what I found in my experience is very often it's pretty clear. There are specific action items that the person who's being told about the emotional honesty from the person who is feeling the emotion, very often these are very actionable and reasonable things for somebody to do. It may not be a habit. It may not be something that comes naturally. It may not be something that the person thought of. But very often they are small changes that, again, instead of trying to defend, no, but I do love you. You should feel loved because I do love you. This is a big one, to be really honest with you. I don't feel loved. Oh, but I love you. You should feel loved. Yeah, but I don't feel loved. And hopefully you can understand the difference. I might even recognize logically, yes, I can see that you are doing things that express love to me, but what's important to me as a human being is that I actually feel loved. And this is true of many things: love, acceptance, empathized with, understood, seen, heard. These are things that can be game changers for us as human beings. We might decide to stay with somebody or leave someone in a romantic context based solely on I feel heard and understood versus not, or I feel loved versus not. Again, with emotional honesty, it's not about do you love me? And again, this is a point that you want to be clear on if you're understanding what I'm saying here. If you say, you don't love me because of XYZ, that is not emotional honesty. Okay, that is accusing someone and making statements beyond what we can truly know, because we don't ever know someone else's mind. As much as you might be intuitive and you think you can know someone else's mind, the truth is you can't. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're Jesus or Buddha or the Dalai Lama or a psychiatrist or someone who studies the human mind. You can make a very educated guess. You might be right more often than not, but you don't know another person's heart and mind. You don't. So it's very, very troublesome when we say something like, you don't love me, and here's the evidence, right? Versus, I can say, I don't feel loved. And I don't feel loved because when you do this, that makes me feel that you don't love me. When you do that, I feel you don't love me. When you do this, I feel like that's not the behavior of someone who loves someone else. You see the difference? And that difference is important. Because again, it can mean the difference between someone feeling attacked for, again, something that is maybe not true for them. Maybe they do love you. Maybe they love you more than they've ever loved anyone in their life. But for whatever reason, their behavior doesn't make you feel loved. So when you say, hey, you don't love me, and here's why, that doesn't ring true for them, and they're going to get defensive and they're going to argue. Most likely, unless they have a very high level of spiritual or emotional intelligence, okay? So again, this can be the difference between success or failure in communicating. When you do this, I don't feel loved, versus you don't love me and here's why, okay? Or you don't listen to me and here's why. Again, not you don't listen to me, but when you do this, I don't feel heard. I don't feel like you're listening to me, right? Very different. It may seem like it's very subtle, but that subtle difference makes all the difference, okay? So again, in my experience, very often when people lay this out, and when the person who is being emotionally honest says what they need, very often it's very simple things. So again, just don't check your phone when we're at dinner. Or if you do check your phone, maybe say or communicate why it's important that you do. Now here's the other part of it. There can be instances where the ask is too much. So let's take an example. Let's say that I'm a doctor, or I have a profession where it is very important for me to stay in contact with clients or to constantly check my phone for whatever reason. Perhaps that's just part of the package. Again, someone may still feel like when you check your phone, I don't feel valued, or I feel not seen or heard, whatever it is. We don't always, right? Hearing that, again, we can repeat that back. When I do X, you feel Y. When I check my phone, you feel undervalued. We may then, instead of saying, okay, I'll change my behavior, again, instead of trying to justify, we might, though, explain. And explain why we really can't make a change in this instance, right? Maybe because of professional reasons, or perhaps it's just part of who we are, part of our personality. We don't really feel like that's an aspect we wish to change. So while in the majority of cases that I've seen, very often the ask isn't very big, and it is something that can be accommodated fairly easily. And these small changes can vastly improve the way two people relate. I mean, vastly. It can be a game changer. It can be the difference between constantly arguing, or one of the parties constantly feeling undervalued, or not loved, or not supported, or unsafe, versus feeling completely comfortable and able to relax into a deep, loving relationship. These small things like hug me more often, or tell me how you feel, or again, spend less time on your phone when we're together, or explain why you're using your phone. These things can be really huge. Again, at the same time, sometimes there are boundaries that need to be set. And there, again, can be education and understanding without finger pointing. And we can, again, maybe tell somebody why what we're doing is the way that it is, and how perhaps it doesn't mean what they think it does. And so it can be a bit of a dance where the person who's sharing their emotional honesty, they're just telling you, like 1 + 1 = 2. They're saying, when you do X, I feel Y. That's the current pattern. And again, if they are spiritually and emotionally mature, then they will not try and justify how they feel. They're just saying, this is how it is right now. I'm not saying it should be that way, or that I have a right to feel the way that I feel. I'm just telling you this is how it is. So again, a partnership is a collaboration. You might say, look, I'm a doctor. I am going to have to check my phone. That will not change until I retire. Anytime that I can put my phone down and give you my full attention, like on vacation or when I am retired, I will. But until that happens, if that is something that is a trigger for you, and that you cannot find a way out of emotionally, then we may not be suitable partners for one another. And this can happen, and that's perfectly fine, right? No one's blaming anyone. Again, could this person outgrow this trigger? Could they learn that their partner is showing values in other ways? Absolutely. Maybe their partner lavishes them with gifts. Maybe they communicate constantly how much they love and appreciate them. There are many, many ways people can express their feelings and love. And again, interestingly, as a human being, we aren't receptive to all of them. Again, I personally might find you putting down your phone for the length of our meal more meaningful than paying for my new car. Again, people emotionally, what ticks the boxes for us doesn't have to make sense. And this is, again, the point of this talk. What is going to keep you together with your partner and keep you relating well with anyone? It doesn't have to be your partner. It could be your children. It could be your parents, your grandparents, your friends, people at work or your community. What is going to create valuable and powerful and lasting relationships is, again, this communication and valuing how other people feel and being able to address how they feel effectively. Again, this does not mean always giving people what they want. Again, if I'm a doctor and I have a partner and they say, when you get called in to work, it makes me feel like you don't care about our relationship or you value your work more than you value us, that might be a deal breaker. And that can be expressed very clearly, right? Well, my job isn't going to change. I love what I do. I want someone who loves me and loves me for what I do and as I do it, not someone who wants me to change what I love doing just to be with them. And that's a reasonable ask. That is completely reasonable. So again, what we find in this work is it's not necessarily about who's right or who's wrong or who's justified to feel a certain way and who isn't. Sometimes it's just you're at an impasse, that one person feels one way, another person feels another way, and that means you should part ways. And that can be a beautiful thing and can be the right thing. Other times, and oftentimes, again, I find that the ask often isn't that big. Again, it's these little things, like little paper cuts, that oftentimes can add up to ill will and a feeling of being misunderstood in relating with another. And these can often poison the well and cause a relationship that is otherwise built on a very loving and real foundation to go south. And that's where I'm hoping a talk like this one can be helpful and valuable for you. All right, everyone, so I hope you found today's talk valuable. I'd love to hear from you and your experience with emotional honesty, if you've tried any of these techniques and what your experience has been. Again, if you'd like to reach out to me for one-on-one spiritual counseling or couples counseling or even family counseling, that is something that I do. And so you can reach out and get a quote. We can talk about your situation. Once again, I do want to thank all my patrons on Patreon for supporting me and doing this work, and everyone on YouTube who likes, subscribes, and gives me the thumbs up. Really does help spread the word. Until next time, everyone, thanks again. Namaste, and have a beautiful day.